Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. This week, I want to talk about temperament and how your little's temperament impacts their sleep, how they sleep, how easily sleep comes, what things work and don't work for them. You know, I feel like I talk about temperament a lot on this podcast, or maybe talk around, adjacent to temperament, but I don't think we've actually done an episode on temperament, which is so funny. Because if it's one of the foundational handouts I give to all my clients is a temperament handout. And honestly, I think we could do a whole series on temperament. I think it would be lovely, and I have a few ideas in the works to kind of get some other professionals to have conversations, do some guest episodes focusing a bit more on temperament. But for today, you just have me. And for today, we're going to talk about temperament just from like an overview to kind of give you a teaser to start thinking about how does your baby's temperament impact? How do we look at that in a more nuanced way? So first of all, temperament is genetic. And we're all born with certain predispositions, you could think of it as, or certain temperament traits. And yes, the way that we parent our child across babyhood, toddlerhood, preschool years, childhood, right? That is going to shape how those temperament traits grow, right? We're going to impact the person they become by the way that we parent. And there's certain things that are just there, right? There from the start. So temperament is how we move through the world, how we react, right? How we move through stressful things, how we react to transitions, how we just move through the world and react to the world, right? And it's different, right? We have different temperaments. And I think in the early years, it can be like discovering who your baby is. And it can look a little differently, right? Your newborn baby versus your older baby versus your toddler. And sometimes we have confounding factors, right? A baby with some serious health concerns or a lot of discomfort. We're going to see that interacting with who they are temperament-wise. And sometimes it can be like, is this discomfort? Is this dysregulation? Is this, inherently a temperament trait? And so there's some exploring, right, when there's extra things happening with baby. But let's kind of go back to these temperament traits, right? So there's lots of different research that's been done over the years. I'm going to talk a little bit about some sort of foundational research way back into the 50s. And then we're going to talk about a little bit newer research and some different ways of looking at temperament. So way back in the 50s, there was some research done, and they came up with 9 temperament traits, right? And each of these traits is a spectrum. And so your baby might fall in different places on that spectrum, right? So when I start working with a family, I give them a handout. It has a sort of modified temperament little ranking tool, I guess you could call it. And the idea here is kind of let's map out what we see and how we perceive the way our baby's acting. And yeah, this is totally subjective, right? I have lots of parents like, Kim, I don't know much about other babies. How do I know if they're more or less of this? We don't always know. And that's okay. We're not like diagnosing here. This is a tool to think about what pieces of who your baby are might have some genetic tendencies, right? Versus things that are all about what we do as a parent. And so those traits, let's kind of go through them, right? So one is like activity level, right? Is your baby very active, very on the move? Are they a little bit more chill, low energy, right? That is a temperament trait. And so the babies that literally feel like you cannot give them enough activity, these are highly active kiddos, and that is who they are, right? Versus the ones that are much more happy to kind of sit and play, a little bit less active, to be untechnical about it. Distractibility, right, is one of the temperament traits. So some babies are very distractible, some are not very distractible. And again, we have that spectrum across there. Intensity is another one. And so the intensity of responses, that's happy responses and unhappy responses, right? Joy, excitement, frustration, upset. Some babies are much more intense than others. Some humans, right, are much more intense than others. Some are very easygoing. And that, again, is a big one. We're thinking about like we want to make a change, or we want to do something, and a really intense baby is going to have big reactions. Versus a really even-tempered, kind of more easygoing baby is going to not have as big reactions, right? They're going to handle that much easier in general. Then we have body rhythmicity, regularity, right? And this is some people's bodies fall into patterns very easily. This is feeding, this is sleep, this can be elimination, right? This is their body just falls into that rhythm. These are often the parents that are like, oh my gosh, I did these simple things and my baby's on a nap schedule at 2 months old. And you're like, what? What is this, right? It's that they have a very rhythmic, regular baby. Many babies are somewhere in the middle here, right? And some babies and toddlers are really irregular. And it is such a struggle to bring some sort of consistency or predictability to their sleep timings well past when other littles are pretty rhythmic. And, if that's who your baby is, then it's like, how do we work with that, right? Sensitivity is another one. So sensitivity to the environment, to stimuli, sensitivity to emotion, so perceptiveness, right? This can be one where obviously a highly sensitive baby is going to need a lot more regulation, a lot more support, generally speaking, than again, a baby that is not as sensitive. And so you can kind of see here, like if we are thinking about how do we cluster these traits, right? So how clusters of these traits impact your sleep. An intense, sensitive baby is going to react really different than a less sensitive, less intense baby. And then we have approachability, right? How do they experience new experiences, new people, new things, new places, right? That is a temperament trait that has some genetic components to how quickly they warm up, or, how much they need to observe and take it all in before they are going to interact with a new person or a new place. Adaptability, another temperament trait. So again, thinking about transitions. How do we move between activities? How do we adjust to new things? Low adaptability, high intensity, high sensitivity. Oof, right? We have a really different baby than your average baby there. And then we have persistence. So, how much do they kind of committed, how much do they stick in with what they want? And I think we see this a lot with babies that, really don't do well with big abrupt changes, or, really toddlers who, like, if you ever say you have a limit and don't hold the limit, and then they're just looking for why is that, 0.111, 0.001 time you didn't hold that limit. How do I get that? So they're very persistent. And so again, persistent, low adaptability, high sensitivity, high intensity, high activity. These can be the babies that struggle with sleep the most, versus more easygoing, more adaptable, sometimes more distractibility is helpful, right? We can distract them from the thing that we don't want to do. These are babies that are more easygoing with sleep. So I didn't count those for you, but I believe I got all 9 there. And the idea here isn't that you're going to diagnose your baby's temperament, but just to see like these different elements that shape their sleep patterns are part of, can be broken down in these ways. And you can see that they can have different degrees of these things that come together to make up who they are. And then we have some more recent research, and this one I feel like is sort of more out there in the sleep world a bit, and that is dandelion versus orchid. And the idea that we have a spectrum, right? 80% of babies kind of falling more on the dandelion end of the spectrum, 20% on the orchid. And dandelions are the easygoing, right? The highly adaptable, more rhythmic, regular, lower intensity, less persistent, less high in the activity department, right? More approachable, more social, much more resilient, inherently littles. And they can do okay with kind of a range of parenting styles. They're more forgiving to parents. I don't mean like actively forgiving, but like they can thrive under sort of less optimal parenting conditions much more easily. And then we have our orchids, who are our highly sensitive, highly persistent, highly intense, highly active, less adaptable, less approachable, right? Less rhythmic in their bodies. These are our orchids. And they are harder to parent. Like there's just no other way to say it. They are harder to parent, and they require much more attuned, responsive parenting to thrive to their fullest potential. And they can grow up to be phenomenal adults, right? These are not bad characteristics, but they are characteristics where they need a lot more support and intentional support to have that really strong foundation to grow and develop optimally. And these, most of the babies that I see are towards the orchid end of the spectrum, right? And it's not like a clear, clean cut, just like we were saying with spectrums, with each of the temperament traits. It's not like you're a dandelion, boop, then you're an orchid, right? It is a spectrum. And I think we can, professionals all kind of peg, oh, this is definitely a dandelion, this is definitely an orchid. And then there's babies in the middle that are kind of a mixture, where they're really sensitive about one thing, but much more adaptable about something else. And so it's not like it's not a straightforward thing. And so when we think about temperament, we understandably are focusing on a lot of the things that impact how we parent our littles, our babies and our toddlers, our preschoolers, right? Our young children. And we often think about their temperament traits and like how hard or easy they are to parent at those young ages. And we forget that so many of these traits that we struggle with as parents, these persistence and sensitivity, kind of high drive, kind of babies, toddlers, are really great traits in adults, right? Once they are more independent. So a lot of the things that we struggle with in the young years are actually wonderful things and things that we want for our children as they grow up, right? We don't want pushover compliant children. We want children that can think for themselves, that go after what they want, that, are perceptive, that are persistent. And so those things we want for them as an adult can be really challenging in the early years. And then you line up a lot of those sensitivities around sleep, right? Where we need to give them a lot of extra support, where it is a very different experience and a much longer timeway to more independence than the people around you, and most people around you are going to have more easygoing babies. If you have an orchid, if you have a highly persistent, highly sensitive, intense kind of baby. But we have to remember that this lines up with our own temperament traits. So there's genetic components to these traits, right? That's sort of the whole thing, is temperament is genetic. But like maybe we're a highly sensitive parent and it's hard to cope with our highly sensitive, intense baby, or we are less rhythmic in our body. So it's harder for us to or we are very rhythmic, right? And maybe it's harder because our baby's less rhythmic. So maybe they didn't take after us in that way. So sometimes different temperament traits are harder to cope with, and sometimes similar ones are harder to cope with. So it can be interesting to reflect on the ways in which we differ and the ways in which we are similar to our kiddos. So just rounding us back up, because I feel like this episode has been long enough. Lots more we could go into in more detail. But your baby's temperament is going to affect their sleep. It's going to affect the amount of support they need to be able to relax and feel safe and secure to fall asleep. It's going to impact how sensitive they are to things bothering them and disrupting their sleep overnight, right? Some babies don't fuss at all by a wet diaper. Other babies like the sheet wrinkles, and that's just too much for them. They cannot handle it. So that's going to impact what brings them into alertness enough to need you, and how much support they need again to co-regulate with you to go back to sleep. It's going to affect how easily their body falls into sleep rhythms, right? It's going to affect how easily and low stress you can change something parent-led, particularly if your baby's not there yet, right? Easygoing babies, adaptable babies, it's so much easier to nudge changes, right, in how they're falling asleep or where they're sleeping than these highly sensitive, highly persistent, highly intense babies, where it is much harder and things are much more stressful to try and shape and change things about their sleep. And I'm not saying you can't, but I think we do have to be cognizant and aware of like these things are going to impact the process, no matter what kind of strategies you're using. There isn't like an exemption because, we're responsive. We're going to do our best. But like ultimately that's where these intense babies, a lot of times, like if this is too stressful, then we need to find a way to stop and do it later, right? We can't do things on everybody else's timeline. With these more orchid littles, they're just not there yet. They take longer to get there. So anyway, I don't want to ramble. I find this topic really interesting. I hope that you have found it interesting, and I hope it gives you some food for thought, thinking about the members of your family, how some of these temperament ideas apply and how they interact, and how maybe they're shaping your current sleep situation. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.